This is my true story. I raised my son alone after his mother passed away, hoping he'd grow into a man who cared for people, not just profits. I thought he understood sacrifice, until I saw what comfort did to him. I'm an old man now, with a weak heart and a strong memory. I never asked for much, just a ride to my doctor's appointments and a little respect. But instead, my own son decided those visits weren't necessary and canceled my appointment. That day, something inside me changed. I didn't yell, I didn't argue, I just waited. And when the time came, I made him feel what I felt. Before that, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And please subscribe so my story can reach more people. Last month, I was supposed to see my heart doctor in Dallas. It wasn't a new appointment. It was one that had been booked months in advance. My doctor had warned me not to miss it. My son promised he'd drive me, said he'd take care of everything. He even called the office once to confirm the date. I trusted him completely, like any father would. I got up early that morning, shaved, put on my best shirt, and gathered all my papers neatly in a folder. I sat by the door with my jacket folded over my arm, waiting for him to pull into the driveway. The hours passed. The clock ticked loud in the quiet house. I checked my phone twice, then 3 times. No message, no call. I thought maybe traffic had delayed him. Around noon, the phone rang. I reached for it quickly, expecting to hear his voice telling me he was on his way. Instead, it was the clinic. The woman on the line spoke gently, asking if I wanted to reschedule since the family member who handled my file had already canceled the appointment that morning. My hand froze around the phone. I asked her to repeat it, but the words didn't change. The appointment was gone, canceled by my own son. I hung up and sat in silence. I didn't move for a long time. Outside, the Texas sun was bright, but the room felt dim. I looked at the folder on my lap, my test results, prescriptions, referral letters, all useless now. I couldn't understand why he'd do that. I replayed every conversation we'd had about it. He had smiled, promised, told me not to worry. I wondered if maybe it was a mistake, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. It felt deliberate. That night, I tried to convince myself he was just trying to save me the trouble. Maybe he thought it wasn't important, but heart pain isn't something you ignore. The next morning, I checked my phone again. No missed calls, no messages, not even a text to say he was sorry or to explain. I made breakfast in silence and sat at the table staring at the chair across from me, the one he used to sit in as a teenager while I told him to eat before school. The same boy who used to depend on me for everything had decided that my health was optional. The days that followed felt longer. I could feel my chest tightening again, but I didn't say a word to him. He had made his choice. I decided I'd make mine soon enough. I remembered something my doctor once said. Don't let anyone control your care. Those words echoed in my mind all week. He thought by taking charge of my schedule he was being helpful, but what he was really doing was playing God with my life. One evening, I looked at my medication bottles lined up by the sink, half empty, labels fading, reminders of a body that had already seen too many miles. I thought about all the times I drove him to his own appointments when he was a boy, late nights, long drives, bad weather. Never once did I complain. I showed up because that's what fathers do. Now, in my old age, when I needed help just to get to a doctor, the man I raised decided it wasn't worth his time. I didn't cry, I didn't call him, I just sat there in that chair until it got dark, the folder still beside me. Somewhere deep inside, something settled, not anger, not bitterness, just clarity. I had spent my life fixing things for others. Now it was time to fix something for myself. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I knew one thing for sure. He might have canceled my appointment, but he had just scheduled his own lesson. When I finally spoke to him a few days later, his tone told me everything before his words did. There was no apology, no concern, just carelessness. He said the doctor visits were a waste of time, that I was fine, that I worried too much. He said it like it was a joke, like canceling my appointment was a favor instead of a betrayal. I could almost hear the shrug in his voice, that casual confidence people get when they think they know better. I didn't argue. I just listened. But inside, Every word he said landed heavy. He thought he was being smart, managing my life like it was another bill he could cut to save a few dollars. He didn't realize that by doing so, he was cutting through the one thing I still had: my independence. After that call, I sat quietly at the kitchen table again. The same table where I'd planned my life for decades. Mortgage papers, taxes, savings, every decision made carefully, every responsibility handled with discipline. I'd always taught him to do the same. Yet here he was, treating my life like a list of expenses he could rearrange whenever he felt like it. I looked around the house and saw small reminders of what I had built: the walls I painted, the roof I fixed, the furniture I'd bought piece by piece. Everything in that home was earned. Nothing was handed to me. I had worked, saved, and built a life strong enough to stand through every hard season. Now, my own son was acting like that life was his to manage. He had started taking over more things recently: paying bills, managing online accounts, telling me which expenses were unnecessary. I didn't ask him to. I thought he was trying to help, but it wasn't help anymore. It was control. Every time I asked about my mail or my card statements, he'd say he had it covered. Every time I tried to make a plan, he'd say he'd already done it. Slowly, piece by piece, he had taken the wheel from my hands until I was just a passenger in my own life. That realization hit me hard. I wasn't angry yet. I was disappointed, not just in him, but in myself for letting it happen. I had spent years teaching him to be responsible, to earn, to take care of family, to do right by others. Somewhere along the way, he forgot those lessons. Or maybe he just stopped listening. I thought about my wife, how proud she'd been of him when he graduated, how she always said he'd grow into a man who'd never let us down. If she could see this now, it would break her heart. Maybe that's why I stayed quiet. Maybe part of me didn't want to say it out loud because admitting it made it real. That week, he sent me a text saying he'd handle the bills for the month. No, how are you feeling? No mention of the missed appointment, no concern. Just business as usual. He thought I'd forgotten, but I hadn't. Every choice he made that month added up in my mind like small debts waiting to be collected. He had no idea what was coming. He thought my silence meant acceptance. It didn't. It meant patience. I knew the time would come when he'd understand the difference between helping and controlling, between taking care of someone and taking advantage of them. I didn't know how I'd teach it yet, but I knew I would. I'd built my life by handling problems calmly, not loudly. And this one, though personal, would be no different. I went to bed that night with a strange calm in my chest. I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was thinking about balance, how life has a way of setting things right when the scales tip too far. He had taken control of my health, my choices, my trust. But he forgot something simple. Every string he pulled was still tied to me. He could cancel appointments, but he couldn't cancel accountability. And soon, he was going to learn that lesson the hard way. The days that followed moved slow, heavy, and quiet. I didn't bring up the appointment again. I didn't mention the doctor or the clinic. I just went about my days like nothing happened. But inside, something had shifted. I started paying attention to the small things, the way he avoided checking on me, how the phone calls got shorter, how his priorities had changed. He was always busy now, busy working, busy showing off his new truck, busy planning weekend trips to Austin with his friends, busy doing everything except being a son. He liked to remind me he was handling everything, but I didn't see much being handled. My chest pain returned a few days later. It started as a dull pressure, then faded, then came back stronger. I sat in my chair one morning, hand over my heart, breathing slow. I could have called him, but I didn't. I knew exactly how that would go. He'd say I was overthinking it, that it was just stress or age. So I said nothing. I wrote the date down in my notebook instead. The time, the feeling, how long it lasted. I'd keep track myself. If he thought I couldn't take care of my own health, I'd prove him wrong. Every evening, I'd see him on social media, posting pictures of restaurant dinners, gym selfies, and late-night drives in that new truck. The same truck he bought using a card I paid off for him years ago. I thought about all the times I'd helped him when he was younger, paying for school, co-signing his first apartment, bailing him out when bills piled up. I never asked for anything in return. I only wanted him to remember where he came from. But looking at those pictures, I realized he'd forgotten. He wasn't malicious, just comfortable. Too comfortable. One night, I went to get my mail and noticed an envelope addressed to him in my box. It was a credit card statement. I didn't open it, but the amount on the front made my stomach tighten, a balance higher than my old mortgage payment. He had no idea what limit meant anymore. That night, I didn't sleep much. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling that slow ache in my chest again. He thought he was taking care of things, but in reality, he was slowly burying both of us under his arrogance. I didn't speak to him for the next few days. He didn't notice. He was too busy bragging about how he had streamlined everything. My accounts, my bills, even my medical insurance. He said everything was automated now. What he really meant was that he had locked me out of my own life. I couldn't make a payment without it going through him. I couldn't schedule a visit without his permission. He had turned himself into a gatekeeper, standing between me and the world I'd built long before he was born. So I started writing again. Not letters, but lists. Things he controlled, things he didn't, things I could still change. It became my routine. Every morning, coffee in one hand, pen in the other. I didn't need revenge. I needed a plan. I watched the way he spent, the things he valued, the patterns he didn't even see himself falling into. And in those quiet days, I realized something. I didn't need to fight him to win. I just needed to remind him where everything he used came from. I kept my silence because silence makes people careless. He thought I was old and slow, that I'd forgotten how the world works. He was wrong. I was just waiting for the right moment. The moment he'd feel the same helplessness I felt sitting by that door waiting for a ride that never came. I woke up one morning, heart still sore but mind clear. It was time. He thought he could manage my life for convenience. Now I was going to make his life a little less convenient. I spent the next few mornings the same way. Coffee, quiet, and thought. I wasn't interested in yelling or scolding him. Words wouldn't fix what he had become. So I chose silence, the kind that makes people reveal who they really are. My first step was simple. Take back control. I went through every drawer, every envelope, and found the papers I'd signed months ago, the ones that had given him temporary access to my accounts, insurance, and bills. He'd promised to help manage things while I recovered from surgery, but he never gave that power back. That morning, I sat at the kitchen table with a notepad and wrote a single line across the top. Everything he thinks he controls. Below it, I started listing my bank, my cards, my bills, my appointments, my property. Everything. By the time I finished, 2 pages were full. I called my bank first. The woman on the line recognized my name and politely verified my information. I told her I needed to review every account tied to my profile. She paused when she saw how many cards were attached. I told her to freeze them all, every one except mine. It took less than 10 minutes. My pulse stayed steady. I wasn't doing it out of spite. I was doing it to remind him that I still held the foundation of everything he used. Next, I called my doctor's office. The receptionist sounded surprised to hear from me directly. I explained that my appointment had been canceled by someone else. She checked the record, apologized, and offered me the next available slot. I accepted and wrote down the date. Then she asked if I needed transportation. I told her I'd take the city bus. She sounded worried, but I meant it. I was done depending on someone who didn't treat responsibility seriously. That afternoon, I found my wallet and made sure I still had my personal card, the one with my name only. I hadn't used it in a while. Most of the household expenses went through the shared accounts my son managed. I decided that would change starting now. I went through every automatic payment, unsubscribed, disconnected, and re-registered them under my own email. One by one, I took back everything he'd claimed was for my convenience. Later that week, I visited the local credit union in person. I walked in wearing my old denim jacket, the one I used when I worked construction jobs back in the 70s. The manager remembered me. He helped me set up a new account, just for me. No co-signers, no shared access, no extra cards. He handed me the paperwork to sign and said quietly, "It's good to see you taking control again." I nodded. Sometimes small victories mean more than big ones. At home, I filed every new document neatly in a folder labeled Private. Then I opened a second folder and placed photocopies of all the accounts I'd just frozen. I didn't do it for revenge. I did it for proof. If he ever asked what happened, I'd have the answer ready, not as anger, but as evidence. He liked numbers and paperwork. I'd give him both. In the evenings, I'd sit on the porch and think about how easily he had taken over without me noticing. It wasn't theft. It was comfort. I had let him handle things because I thought it was easier. And maybe that was my mistake. The moment you let someone else manage your life completely, you stop being the driver. You become the passenger, hoping they know where they're going. I wasn't going to let that happen again. When the mail arrived that Friday, one envelope stood out. A statement from one of the frozen cards. I opened it carefully. The charges told the whole story. Restaurants, gas stations, online stores, even a new phone plan. He wasn't living carefully. He was living off me. I folded the paper, slipped it back into the envelope, and placed it inside the private folder. By the end of the day, I had everything set. The new account worked, the cards were frozen, and my appointment was rescheduled. I didn't tell him a word. Letting him discover it himself would be the final part of the plan. Because sometimes, the only way to teach someone what it feels like to lose control is to let them feel the silence you once sat in, alone, waiting, and realizing too late that trust isn't a right. It's a privilege. That weekend, while sorting through old papers, I came across a faded photograph tucked between my insurance files. It was my son at 6 years old, sitting in a hospital bed with his arm wrapped in a cast. I remembered that day as if it were yesterday. He had fallen off his bike, crying so hard he could barely breathe. I drove him all the way to Tulsa in the middle of the night, half awake, one hand on the steering wheel and the other reaching back to make sure he was still okay. The roads were slick with rain, but I didn't stop until I saw the hospital lights. I sat beside him all night, holding his hand while he slept. I would have done anything to take away his pain. That memory burned deep. I had been there every time he was sick, every time he needed something, no matter how tired or broke I was. And now, that same boy, the one I carried through storms, had decided I didn't need care anymore. I stared at that picture for a long time, his little face smiling through the cast, proud that the doctor said he was brave. I had missed work the next day, lost a day's pay, but it never mattered. My job could wait. My son couldn't. Back then, he was my whole reason for pushing through the long hours on the construction sites, the freezing mornings, the blistering summers. I worked so he could have a future better than mine. That was the only goal. That's what fathers do. They give, they protect, they sacrifice. But looking at that photo now, I realized how far that lesson had slipped from his memory. I thought about all the doctor visits I'd taken him to growing up, checkups, dental cleanings, allergy shots. He never missed one because I made sure of it. No excuses, no delays. Even when the car broke down, we took the bus. Even when we were behind on bills, I paid for his care first. I remembered him holding my hand, scared of the needle, and me saying he'd be fine. That same hand that once trembled in fear now held the power to cancel my own appointments without a second thought. That hurt worse than any illness I'd ever faced. I folded the photograph carefully and set it on the table. The house was quiet, and in that silence, I could hear the weight of time. Life had turned the boy who once clung to my arm into a man who believed control meant love. He thought paying bills gave him the right to make decisions for me. He thought comfort meant authority, but comfort spoils fast when it isn't earned. That memory stayed with me all day. I made another list that evening, this time of everything I'd done for him when he was young, every trip, every late night, every sacrifice. Not because I wanted to hold it over him, but because I needed to remind myself of one truth. I didn't owe him anything. I had already paid my debt in full. Parents don't owe their children endless forgiveness. There comes a time when the lessons reverse, when the child must be reminded who taught them to stand in the first place. By sunset, I walked out to the porch and watched the sky turn orange over the hills. I thought about calling him, but I didn't. He wouldn't understand the tone in my voice. I didn't need to explain the pain of watching your own child treat you like an obligation. Some things can't be explained. They can only be felt. He'd feel it soon enough. The photo still sat on the table when I went back inside. I didn't put it away. I wanted it there, in plain sight. It wasn't a reminder of anger. It was motivation. That little boy deserved a father who kept his word, and this old man deserved a son who remembered that. The next day, I'd make one final call, the one that would change everything again. He had canceled my care. I was about to cancel his comfort. The morning after that memory hit me, I woke up with more energy than I'd felt in months. The air felt clearer, my thoughts sharper. It was time. I made coffee, sat at the table, and stared at the phone. I knew what I was about to do wouldn't make me feel proud, but it would make things right. My son had taken over everything, my accounts, my mail, my payments, all under the idea of helping. But now, I was done being helped. I was ready to take back what was mine. I started with the credit company. The woman on the line greeted me politely. I told her my name and gave her my account details. She confirmed that 2 authorized users were listed, me and my son. My stomach tightened as I said the words I'd been rehearsing in my head all week. I asked her to remove him immediately and freeze all accounts under my name. She paused, probably expecting a long explanation, but I gave her none. Just facts. She processed it quietly, then said, "It's done." I thanked her, hung up, and sat there in silence. The sound of the refrigerator humming in the kitchen was the only noise in the room. It felt like the air shifted, calm but firm, like the moment before a storm. Within an hour, it began. Small tremors first. A text from him. "Dad, my card isn't working." "Did you change something?" I didn't answer. I poured myself another cup of coffee and sat back in the chair. I imagined him at the gas station, swiping over and over again, confused, embarrassed, frustrated. The same feeling I had when the clinic told me my appointment had been canceled. Helplessness. That same taste of powerlessness that had sat in my mouth for weeks was now his. As the morning went on, I made another call, this time to the bank. I told them to remove all linked access under his name. The representative said she'd send me new logins and deactivate the old ones. I thanked her and made sure every transaction alert would come to me directly. By lunchtime, it was all sealed. The safety I'd lost without realizing it was finally mine again. I wasn't doing it for revenge. I was doing it for balance. For months, he had controlled everything that belonged to me, assuming age meant weakness. Now he was learning that control can vanish faster than he ever imagined. I went out to the porch and sat down with my notebook. I wrote 2 lines across the top of the page. He canceled my health. I canceled his comfort. That was it. The whole truth in 10 words. He had made decisions about my body without asking me, but I was making decisions about his habits without warning him. And unlike his, mine came with real consequences. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. There was no guilt, no second guessing. I wasn't punishing him. I was reminding him. Everything he owned was built from the help I'd given him. The money I saved, the loans I co-signed, the bills I paid when he struggled. He'd mistaken generosity for weakness, but generosity ends where respect ends. By sunrise, the real storm began. The phone buzzed nonstop. Calls, texts, messages. He must have tried every card, every account, and found the same answer. Declined. I didn't reply. I just sat at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee, the same way I had sat weeks ago waiting for that doctor appointment that never happened. Only this time, the silence didn't hurt. It healed. By noon, I could almost picture him pacing in his apartment, checking statements, refreshing screens, calling customer service. The same frustration that once filled me was now his. But unlike me, he wouldn't find calm. He'd find humility. He'd canceled my doctor appointment because he thought he knew better. I'd canceled his cards because I knew he needed to learn. Fair exchange. Lesson delivered. By noon the next day, I heard the sound of tires screeching up my driveway. A door slammed hard enough to shake the windows. I didn't move. I sat in my chair, calm, steady, and waiting. Moments later, the front door swung open, and there he was, red-faced, sweating, holding his phone like a weapon. His eyes darted across the room, wild with frustration. He looked younger in that moment, not because of his face, but because of the panic in it. The same panic I'd felt when I realized my doctor visit had been canceled. Now, he was the one who didn't understand how everything had slipped from his hands overnight. He started pacing around the living room, running his hand through his hair, tapping his phone over and over like it might change something. I watched him quietly from the kitchen table. I didn't speak. I didn't owe him an explanation. The truth was, sitting all around him, in the silence, in the still air, in the way I wasn't rushing to make things easy for him anymore. He finally stopped pacing and looked at me, his face tense. The anger had started to fade, replaced by confusion, then worry. That's when I saw it. The realization hitting him that maybe, just maybe, he'd gone too far. He sat down across from me. The house was quiet except for the hum of the fridge. I poured a cup of coffee, slid it toward him. He didn't take it. He just stared at the table. I didn't need to say much. He already knew. Sometimes silence speaks louder than shouting ever can. After a while, he leaned back in his chair and looked around the room, the photos on the wall, the clock, the same things that had been there since he was a boy. I could almost see the memory coming back to him. The same home that raised him was now the same one teaching him. He started trying to explain, his voice low, the words tangled. Something about how he didn't mean harm, how he thought he was helping, how life was expensive, how things got confusing. I didn't stop him. I didn't respond either. I let him talk, not for me, but for him. So he could finally hear how weak his excuses sounded. I sat still, hands folded, eyes calm. When he finished, the silence hung between us again. He waited for me to say something, maybe to scold him or forgive him. But I didn't. I just looked at him and then at the phone he kept clinging to like a lifeline. He finally asked what happened to his cards. I told him nothing except the truth, that everything he'd been using was mine, and now it was back where it belonged. No anger, no emotion, just fact. His jaw tightened, his shoulders dropped. The same son who once stood tall and sure now sat small and quiet in his father's kitchen. He realized in that moment that I wasn't the old man he thought I was. I was the same man who built his entire life brick by brick. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He just sat there with his head down. Maybe it was shame. Maybe it was understanding. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm. I told him that trust isn't given. It's maintained. That I wasn't punishing him, only returning balance. That actions have weight, and his had fallen too heavy on me for too long. He didn't answer. He just nodded slightly, eyes glassy. Then he stood up, slowly, like someone who had finally learned that being right isn't the same as being good. He left a few minutes later. The door shut gently behind him. I watched from the window as he walked back to his truck, no anger left in his steps, just quiet. He drove off without another word. For the first time in months, the house felt peaceful again. Not because I'd won, but because I'd finally stopped losing pieces of myself trying to please him. That evening, I wrote one sentence in my notebook before bed. Sometimes, love needs a lock. And for the first time in a long while, I slept like a man who had taken his life back. The next few days passed differently. The phone, once filled with his constant updates and requests, stayed silent. No messages, no calls, no reminders about bills or things he was handling. The quiet felt strange at first, but peaceful. I could breathe again. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for someone to manage me. I was managing myself. My new appointment date came, and I took the city bus just like I planned. The ride was slow, the seats old, but the freedom felt good. Every stop reminded me that I was still capable, I didn't need anyone to hold my hand. When I finally reached the clinic, the nurse looked surprised to see me. She smiled and said, "It's good to see you again." I nodded, handed over my papers, and sat quietly in the waiting room. It wasn't pride I felt, it was peace. The doctor ran the usual tests and frowned at the results. My blood pressure was higher than before. He asked if I'd been keeping up with my medications. I told him I had, mostly. He said I was lucky I came in when I did. Another few weeks without proper checkups, and things could have gone bad fast. I nodded and thanked him. On the ride home, I kept thinking about that word. Lucky. Lucky that I caught it in time. Lucky that I decided to act when I did. But the truth was, it wasn't luck. It was choice. A choice to stop depending on someone who confused control with care. 2 days later, my son called. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick up. His voice was different this time. Quieter, slower, almost unsure. He asked how I was, not in the usual rushed tone, but carefully, like he actually meant it. He asked if I'd gone to the doctor. I told him yes. He asked what the doctor said. I told him the truth, that my blood pressure was high, that it could have been worse, that it was a good thing I went. There was silence on the line for a few seconds. Then he said he was glad I was okay. His voice cracked a little, just enough for me to hear the guilt. He didn't apologize, but he didn't need to. The way he spoke told me he understood. The next morning, I heard his truck pull into the driveway. I watched through the window as he stepped out carrying a grocery bag and a small pharmacy bag. He walked up the porch, knocked softly, and waited. I opened the door, and he stood there quietly, not saying much. He handed me the groceries and the medication and said he wanted to make sure I had everything. I let him in. He didn't talk about money or bills or accounts. He just asked if I'd eaten. Then he sat in the same chair across from me, the same one where he'd stood angry a week ago. But this time, his posture was different. No pride, no excuses, just humility. He offered to drive me to my next appointment. I didn't say yes right away. I told him we'd see. He nodded. I think he understood that trust isn't something you demand. It's something you rebuild, slowly, one honest act at a time. For the first time in months, he stayed longer than 10 minutes. We talked about small things, the weather, the yard, the repairs the house needed. It felt normal again, not because everything was fixed, but because he finally saw me as a person, not a project. That night, as I sat alone again, I realized what the real lesson was. He thought money was power. He thought control was care. But when it was all gone, when his cards stopped working, when the comfort faded, he came back to the one thing that mattered: family. Sometimes people don't learn through words. They learn through loss. In the end, it wasn't about revenge. It was about respect. And he finally understood that taking care of someone isn't about managing their life. It's about showing up when it counts. After that day, something shifted between us. It wasn't dramatic, just steady, like watching winter slowly turn into spring. He started calling every morning before work. Sometimes it was a quick check-in, other times just to say good morning. The first few times I could tell he was trying to make it a habit, not yet a reflex. But soon it became natural. He'd ask if I'd eaten, if I'd taken my medicine, if I needed groceries or a ride anywhere. The questions were small, but behind them was something real. Effort. For the first time in years, he wasn't calling to control something. He was calling to care. I didn't make it easy for him. Trust once broken doesn't mend overnight. I kept my finances locked down, my cards private, my accounts under my name only. He still didn't have access to anything, and I didn't plan to change that anytime soon. Every time he hinted about helping with the bills again, I reminded him that I had things handled. It wasn't pride, it was principle. If he wanted to be part of my life, he had to do it through action, not access. And slowly, he started to understand that. He began showing up on weekends, sometimes to mow the lawn, sometimes just to sit on the porch. He didn't talk much about what happened, but I could see it in the way he looked at me. The awareness that what he'd done wasn't a small mistake. It had almost cost him the one relationship he couldn't afford to lose. He was quieter now, more patient. When I spoke, he listened. When I paused, he waited. That was new. My health started improving again. The doctor said the medication was working and that I should keep coming in regularly. This time, my son didn't need reminding. He called the office himself, not to cancel, but to confirm the next appointment. He even wrote the date on a sticky note and put it on my fridge. It was strange at first, seeing him take care of something he once dismissed, but it felt right. It was the kind of full circle that life sometimes gives you when you least expect it. There was one afternoon that stood out. I had been fixing an old chair on the porch, and he stopped by after work. He didn't come empty-handed. He brought 2 sandwiches from the diner and 2 cups of coffee. We sat there eating quietly, watching the street. He looked at me and said nothing, but his expression said enough. Gratitude, regret, maybe both. I didn't bring up the past. I didn't need to. Sometimes silence is how 2 people say sorry to each other without using words. In the evenings, when I sat alone, I thought about how easily things could have stayed broken, how one stubborn decision could have split us for good. But that's not how love works. Real love doesn't shout or punish. It corrects. And even though the lesson came through discomfort, it stuck. He had learned that taking care of someone isn't about making their choices for them. It's about standing beside them when they make their own. He still doesn't have his credit cards back, and he doesn't ask anymore. I think he finally understands why. That trust was a privilege, not a possession. I told myself that if he keeps this up, showing up, staying consistent, remembering that care means respect, I might loosen the reins one day. But not yet. He still has more to prove, not through promises, but through time. The change wasn't fast, it wasn't flashy, but it was real. The son who once canceled my doctor appointment was now the man who drove me to every one of them, waiting in the lobby until I was done. And every time I saw him sitting there, calm, quiet, patient, I saw a reflection of the man I used to be when I sat by his bedside as a boy. Life had gone full circle. He canceled my doctor visits thinking he was saving time and money. I canceled his credit cards and ended up saving something bigger, his conscience. What started as anger turned into lesson, and what began as silence became change. I didn't plan revenge. I planned a reminder. Because sometimes love needs to be firm, not soft. Sometimes the only way to make someone see the weight of their actions is to let them carry it themselves. He thought being in control made him responsible, but real responsibility is about presence. It's showing up, not showing off. It took everything falling apart for him to finally learn that difference. Now, months later, things feel steady again. The house is quiet but alive, the way it used to be when my wife was still here. My health is better, my bills are paid, my peace is intact. Every morning, I get a call before sunrise. His voice sounds clearer now. No arrogance, no rush, just care. He tells me he's on his way to work, asks what I'll have for breakfast, reminds me to take my pills. Those words may sound small, but they carry more meaning than any apology could. He's not perfect, but he's trying, and that's all a father ever really asks for. Sometimes I think back to that day when the clinic called, the moment I realized my appointment had been canceled. That feeling of helplessness sat heavy in my chest. I remember sitting there, wondering how my own son could treat me like that. But now, when I look back, I see that moment differently. It wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of a correction. Painful, yes, but necessary. Because some lessons can't be taught with kindness. They have to be learned through consequence. I never returned his cards, and he never asked again. That silence between us about money became an understanding. He learned that when you treat family like accounts, you lose both. He started paying for things on his own again, his bills, his gas, his groceries. The first time he told me he paid off his balance with his own paycheck, his voice carried a hint of pride I hadn't heard in years. That pride was earned the right way this time, not through my wallet, but through his own work. Sometimes when we sit together now, I catch him glancing around the house. I think he remembers what it means to belong somewhere without owning it. This place isn't just wood and walls, it's years of effort, patience, and lessons. He sees that now. The same man who once thought he was protecting me has finally realized I was the one protecting him all along. One evening, after his visit, I sat outside watching the sunset stretch across the Texas sky. The light turned the grass golden, the air still and calm. I thought about how easy it is to confuse love with control, how thin that line becomes when pride steps in. My son crossed it, but he found his way back. I didn't destroy him. I just handed him the mirror he refused to look into. And when he finally saw himself, he started changing. I keep a simple note on the fridge now. It says, "Respect isn't taught by talking, it's learned by losing." That note reminds me of everything that happened and everything that healed after. I'm not bitter. I'm thankful. Because sometimes the hardest moments rebuild the strongest bonds. He may have canceled my appointment once, but what followed fixed more than my health. It fixed my faith in him. He learned the lesson that every son must learn sooner or later, that parents don't live forever and care isn't a burden. It's a privilege. I didn't raise him to be perfect. I raised him to be aware. And now, finally, he is. He canceled my doctor visits thinking he was saving money. I canceled his cards and saved his soul instead. In this world, you can rebuild credit, but you can't rebuild trust once it's gone. And that, I think, was the greatest lesson of all.